Hello friends, welcome back to my channel. My name is Amelia and today we're doing a very belated video. We're going to be doing my February reading wrap up. I'm aware that it is like March 20th, but you know, it is what it is. We're doing it now. So I have my stack here. It was a pretty good reading month. I got through 5 physical books and I also finished an audiobook. So let's go ahead and talk about everything that I read. The first of which is Malice by John Gwynne. So I picked this one up because I have read what's out of the Bloodsworn saga so far. It's behind me here, and I really enjoyed that. This kind of has slightly similar vibes in that like we're in like sort of a fractured world of men, and there are gods kind of interfering with the mortal plane. But other than that, that's kind of where the similarities end. This focuses more on like the politics between the human groups and the sort of larger kingdoms, as opposed to the sort of smaller groups that exist in Bloodsworn. And I will say that I think this one, I'm not sure if this is his first book or not, but it's definitely obviously earlier than the other series I was talking about. And I think you could tell a little. I think overall the writing just feels slightly less refined and polished, and some of the dialogue felt a little bit awkward, but overall it's a really well done book, and there's just kind of some smaller nitpicks if I compare it to some of his other work, which maybe isn't specifically fair, but you know, that's kind of how literary critiques go. You know, you're comparing them to other things you've read, your experiences. Anyway, one of the things I really enjoyed about this book was the characters. I felt for the most part they were quite well developed and like well rounded in terms of traits and positive and negatives. I really liked Corbin specifically and his storyline, and actually one of the things that kind of stood out to his storyline is that, you know, a lot of times you'll have like the main character who's just like magically good at everything, but in this one Corbin is really good at sword fighting, but it's explained in terms of like it takes a long time. Like, it's not specifically a long time in the book, but we're skipping forward in time large chunks at a time, so you can see that he's had all the time to practice, and he's also had a better, more advanced teacher than all the others, so like it makes more sense that he's more advanced than a lot of the others his age, which I really liked. It's nice to have a main character who actually has to work for something. One thing I will say about the characters is I do wish there were more women. There are some women who are like interesting as characters, but we only get, I think, like one chapter from the one woman's perspective, and yeah, I'm kind of sick of how many male main characters there are in adult fantasy. Like, just, there needs to be more women. But aside from that, I think one of the more interesting things that Gwyn does in this book is how he handles the whole like chosen one thing. Like, we have this one character who thinks he's the chosen one, declares himself the chosen one, but then we start to see, I don't want to give spoilers, but we start to see some things that maybe make you question that a little bit, and it just makes a very interesting characterization as well as sort of like dynamic for the story to take place in. It's like, ooh, what's really going on here? But yeah, overall I ended up giving this 4 out of 5 stars. It was really good, but I wouldn't say it quite reached the 5-star mark for me. Just a few small nitpicks, as I said before. But yeah, that is Malice by John Gwynne. Next up we have another 4-star read, which is The Tainted Cup by Robert Jackson Bennett. I definitely thought this was going to be a standalone, but apparently it's part of a series, or it's going to be part of a series, but definitely reads more in the standalone sort of vibe. Like, you could just read this one and the main plot is all resolved at the end of it. Like, there are some threads that I guess will continue into the other ones, but you could definitely just read this and like be done. So it's not like you're like ending on a cliffhanger or something and like really waiting on the next book. Like, this is a complete unit. So I did make a whole video reading and reviewing this book. So if you want more in-depth thoughts and to see my reading experience, then be sure to check that one out. But for a sort of abbreviated version of that review, so this is marketed as like a murder mystery Watson Holmes style detective duo, and we do get those elements, but I will say I was very surprised when the initial mystery is resolved very early on, and then we escalate the plot a lot. It becomes a lot more, it becomes like a larger scale, you know, the whole world is kind of involved, or like this whole country is involved, which I'm not 100% sure how I feel about this. Fantasy books, they do love to raise the stakes, but from the back of the book, I definitely thought this was going to be a sort of smaller scale, more cozy sort of story. But I did like how it was escalated. It was very interesting, and it's hard to say much about the escalation without giving away spoilers, but I liked that it, after the sort of little period where they're like, okay, we're going into this escalation, there's kind of like a bridge period, then we get back into like the murder mystery parts, so we got more of that sort of detective-y style stuff, which is kind of what I was really looking for from this book. I think the main criticism that I have for this book is that the characters did feel pretty lacking. They didn't feel like super developed, especially the female detective lady. She feels very much just like a stereotype, like very sort of Sherlock Holmes, just kind of insert, and didn't feel very unique. And the main character was slightly more interesting and slightly more unique, but did feel like he was lacking some backstory. Like there's like little bits of it mentioned, but I don't know. It just, he felt quite bland, I guess, in some aspects, where I just kind of wanted more from him, wanted him more to be more fleshed out, I guess, instead of focusing so much on his abilities. I would really like to hear a bit more about him as a person and sort of why he is the way he is. I think that would have added a lot to this. And then I would say the main strength of this is the world building. They sort of like magic/science system is really interesting. It has to do with plants and grafting, and like grafting them onto people so that people can sort of essentially be adapted to like a specific job within their, it's a kind of Roman inspired military structure, so they will modify people to specifically do certain jobs, which is interesting, and obviously has all sorts of cascading effects on the people and also the society. Alright, next up I read Tropic of Serpents and Voyage of the Basilisk by Marie Brennan. So speaking first about Tropic of Serpents, I had heard a lot about how this was kind of like a low point in the series, so I was expecting it to actually be worse than it was. It is probably not my favorite one so far. I gave it 3.5 out of 5 stars. But I still think the overall quality is decent, and I like how, as in the first book, there are some like threads introduced in this book that are going to continue throughout the series, or at least like they've already come up in the next book. So I like that element to sort of tie things together more than just as if it was like isolated episodes of Lady Trent's life. They're more intertwined, which I think makes it for a more interesting sort of series arc. I do think our main character does behave quite annoyingly at times in this book, but I do also think that is on purpose to an extent to sort of show her character arc throughout the series as she becomes kind of like a better person and matures and stuff. So yeah, I do think it is to an extent on purpose, but it is kind of annoying at times. And then the other thing is that this kind of falls prey to the same thing I was saying about Tainted Cup, which is sort of the unnecessary escalation of the stakes. I think you can write a really interesting book about a character who's learning to be a better person and dealing with the challenges of a foreign language and tropical rainforest and dragons and all that stuff without involving war. It did kind of feel like a little bit just sort of thrown in there so that Isabel could be a hero and make up for her earlier sort of missteps. So I wasn't super fussed on the sort of war plot line, but I do appreciate the character growth that does happen in this book, and I like the addition of Natalie and the exploration of her growing relationship with Mr. Wilker, and how for a second there I thought she was going to go into the whole like Isabel and him romance thing, and this is kind of spoilery, but like she didn't, and I was so glad, because I don't know, a lot of the times the books seem like they cannot allow a man and a woman to just be friends, so I'm glad that they stayed just friends and colleagues. And yeah, that was Tropic of Serpents. So let's go ahead and talk about Voyage of the Basilisks now. So I gave this one 4.5 out of 5 stars and read it immediately after Tropic of Serpents. And I am happy to report that there are more dragons in this one, which was very much enjoyed. And I do also really love a sort of nautical fantasy, although there wasn't a crazy amount of the sort of nautical stuff in this. Like the first bit, they are on the boat, and then probably almost like the second 2/3, they are no longer on the boat. So limited amounts of nauticalness, but still enough that I got like the taste of it that I wanted. So in this one, we're following Isabel. She goes on a voyage around the world. She's trying to work on her theories about dragon taxonomy and like how they're all related and stuff. And this time she brings her son with her, who she left behind in the last book. So we got to explore their relationship and also Isabel's relationship with her own motherhood. I feel like a little bit in the previous 2 books, my problem with Isabel is that she's very like, she's trying to hack in the world of men, so she really leans into the kind of a bit of like the not like other girls kind of vibe. Like she doesn't specifically look down on other women or really think about them much at all, but we don't really see a ton of her being touched with her more like feminine side. And it kind of felt a little bit like in order for her to be smart and strong and capable, she has to live in like this world of men that she's trying to break into. And so it's nice to see her sort of being in touch with also, like I said, her like feminine side and the world of women. Like women can be multifaceted, they can be strong and smart and also love romance and stereotypically female things that are obviously not exclusively the domain of women, but you know, we do love some gender stereotypes apparently in this world. But yeah, it was nice to see her develop a relationship with her son and her, as I said, her relationship with being a mother, because there's more than one way to be a mother. So it's nice to see her discovering her own way, and just to see a book that's kind of showcasing how not all women are mothers in the same way. It's a spectrum. Everybody does their own thing and they can all be valid. One thing I will say is that I was a little bit, the ending felt a little bit abrupt. They just kind of end up getting swept up in this other kind of war-y thing, but it's less in your face, so I don't mind it as much, just like a little bit at the end that it kind of comes up, so it was alright. But then they like immediately go back home and I was like, oh, I kind of wanted to see her complete her voyage and do more dragon research, but it was still good. I understand why they ended it the way they did. I just like, personally, I'm like, give me more voyaging and dragons. And one thing that is kind of interesting is the text in this book is printed in blue ink, which I don't think I've ever seen before. Every book is always black ink. This one's blue, and I appreciate that. It's a little bit different. And then the final physical book that I have is Going Postal by Terry Pratchett, and I ended up giving this one 4 out of 5 stars. I annotated it, can't really tell, but I just have a few little tabbies. I ended up reading this one as a little mini book club with my mom and my sister, although my sister did not read it yet. But my mom did not like it, so you may want to consider that. I would say the style, like the humor in this is kind of a little bit absurdist, sort of along the veins of Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, but I would say with less humor elements. But I would still say that that's kind of a good sort of benchmark. Like if you've read that and you liked it and you liked the humor, then you will probably enjoy this one. But if you didn't, then maybe skip it. But yeah, I've been wanting to get into Discworld for a while, and I think I ended up choosing this one because I did like an online quiz of like where in Discworld should you start, and it gave me this one. I have to say I was not expecting the like Legends and Lattes, Bookshops and Bonus energy in this. Like it's like he is rebuilding the postal service from the ground up. It's been sort of defunct for years now, and he's like a former criminal, and we're following him as he revamps it, revitalizes it. So it definitely has that sort of Legends and Lattes, building something yourself from the ground up energy, which yeah, as I said, I wasn't expecting, but I really enjoyed. Also quite liked the characters in this, just because they don't really feel like other characters that I've read before. They're very unique in terms of like their personalities and their backstories, and yeah, I really enjoyed that because I think sometimes you really get into character archetypes or like kind of similar characters, so it's nice to see some that are completely different. I will say I'm not really super sold on the name of the main character. His name was Moist, and I don't know, it just feels a little bit too much for me personally, but yeah, that is Going Postal. I also have this really nice edition. I couldn't help myself, I had to splurge on the fancy one just because it's so pretty. Alright, and then the final book that I read was Eat the Buddha, which I listened to on audiobook, and I give this one 4 out of 5 stars. It's about Tibet and specifically their relationship with China over the years, and it's told through like multiple people who experience these events' perspectives, which is definitely my favorite way for historical based nonfictions to be told, because you really get sort of into the perspective of the people and it feels more like you're reading a story than just like being told what happened, and like when it happened from a more objective point of view. So it allows you to get a lot more invested in the story, I feel like, because you're following these specific people whose lives you can be invested in. So we follow the lives of several different people whose circumstances are very different from the time of the first march, when the Chinese army first really made inroads in Tibet, and then all the way up to the present, looking at how the Chinese government and people have treated Tibet. And personally, I had really sort of no idea about most of this until reading this book. Like, I knew sort of about the Dalai Lama in exile, but yeah, for the most part, I kind of had really no idea, which is why I think books like this are so important, because they can expand our worldview, and I think it's very important for us to be aware of some of these big things that happen in the world. Like, obviously you can't know every little thing that happens, but it's nice to dive in to some different sort of, I don't know what to call them, events, I guess? I don't know. A lot of the things that the Chinese did to the Tibetans are very reminiscent of how the Europeans treated the native North Americans, so I think it's very important for us to know about, you know, when we're thinking about these big world powers. And minorities have been routinely sort of crushed around the world and had their cultures repressed or almost eliminated, so I think it's good to have these kind of works that inform people about what happened and can sort of help to preserve the culture in some elements. Obviously, the main preservation is happening like by the Tibetans, but the more people who know about the things that have happened, the more general sort of awareness there is of Tibet, which I think is a way of preserving culture, sort of, in itself. But yeah, that is Eat the Buddha. Alright, but that is everything that I read, so here's my stack of read books for the month. As I said, pretty decent reading month, 5 physical books and 1 audiobook. I can't complain about that, and overall of relatively good quality. No 5-star rates this month actually, but a lot of 4 stars, mostly 4 stars. But yeah, that is all that I have time for today. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you next time.